Welcome back, you beautiful people, to the Real Collective podcast. I am Sean Tasse, joined as always by my special host, no longer guest host, official host, Kyle Miller from Mortgage Brokers Ottawa. We are into season 9, episode 1, if you can believe it. And as a sort of token of, hey, here's what's happening. Season 9, Kyle has committed. It's a commitment, just like our long-term relationship, to be doing this on a regular basis. So as always, if you're liking what you're hearing, hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and share this with someone you think might be interested in what we're talking about today, which is investing in real estate, how it's good, how it's bad. If you're buying an investment property, you're selling an investment property, if you are a real estate investor, you're going to want to stick around to pick out the nuance. Even if you're, a seasoned investor, there's some stuff that you might not be thinking of. Kyle, you've got a ton of experience working with investors, mom and pop investors, big ticket investors, people who have, bigger operations. What's worked? What hasn't worked? What's the first thing that I think of or first thing you think of when I talk about investing in real estate?
The first thing that comes to my mind is really just the fact that most people won't understand how the math is done. And that's a big shock to most people. Like when you're investing in real estate, like that's fine, and most people know you got to put down 20%, so that's fine. But what they don't get is, on our side and the bank side, the math isn't one for one. And what I mean by that is, a typical sane person says, okay, my principal, interest, property tax, maybe insurance, whatever, throw it in there. Just keep it simple. $1,000 a month. Those were the days. That was fun back then. Anyway, but $1,000 a month. And then, my rent's $1,500 a month.
You're buying $100,000 property.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. What was that? 2007 was
yeah, right.
Awesome.
Yeah.
But then what happens is they say, okay, my rent's $1,500 a month. So 1,500 minus 1,000, boom, I'm in the black, $500.
Yeah.
Bob's your uncle. Like, what's the problem?
Yeah.
Problem is that the majority of banks, if we keep it simple, because there's some nuance in different places, but the majority of the big banks, at least, will say, hey, we're going to keep your 1,000, but we're going to cut your revenues by half. So now 750 is your revenue minus 1,000. You got a brand new $250 loss. So can you, as a buyer, manage your own life, your own house, your car, all that stuff regularly, and this brand new $250 loss? Because if you can't, we ain't doing it. And if you can't, well, congratulations. So that's the big math. That's the big math that people don't understand actually happens, is they are actively trying to discount your rental revenue. To a degree, I get it, because they want to make sure that people aren't fully just living off that rent.
Yeah.
Because if that renter goes away, because that can happen, the client's stuck holding the bag, and they don't want to be the bank. They, like, the client, you as the landlord or the investor can't be like, well, it's not my fault, didn't rent. Well, that was the point of it. So you have to be able to manage that.
Yeah.
So they come at you hard like that, for sure. That's the biggest thing that I know people don't know.
So that's a great point. So do people then turn around and get a try to buy it in a company? Is that the idea? And then, hey, they can afford that loss?
Not necessarily. And I mean, again, this is it. There's other factors that start to come in, right?
Yeah.
Like I've got clients who, over through the pandemic and stuff, like I'd helped them purchase, like, I think 3 different rentals. And until variable rates and everything skyrocketed, everything was fine. And quite honestly, some were doing better than others. So across the portfolio, they were fine. Right. And that can be something too. If you've got multiple, right, you got someone who's been renting for 20 years and you just can't up their rent.
Yeah.
Well, okay. And you're hoping that the other ones can help supplement that if you're taking a little bit of a hit. But where that math that I was just talking about comes in and hurts, if you will, is the fact that it's like the first one, right?
Yeah.
Like you bought one, because now any loss just comes directly out of your pocket. There is no backup for
Yeah.
that. So putting in a corporation or not, different. It's a different. It's not different. It's the same thing. That's the other thing. And I think this comes out of the U.S. We talk about this all the time about how cool the U.S. is for their real estate, right? Um, uh, Unless it's a true like commercial property, and there's going to be somebody out there that's like, that's not exactly right, Kyle, and I agree, I don't do commercial. But in essence, you're personally liable. Like, you still have to personally guarantee for your residential rental property. So basically think 4 units and below, you're on the hook for that. Put whatever name you want. At the end of the day, you're going to be on the hook for that. If it goes 5+, then there's more of a look to a commercial side where if it's self-sustaining, it can take care of itself. They worry less about you, still worry about you, but worry less about you and more about the property on itself.
Yeah.
So, and that's where people get a little lost. Again, the US is like, I got an LLC that owns my LLC that owns my family trust. Nobody can touch me. Pretty sure we can find out how to touch you here. Like, that happens. So gotta be careful with that.
We're constantly touching you when you're in Canada. You heard it here
Hands
first.
in pockets, baby. Hands in pockets.
You know with RCP.
Oh yeah, you know me. That's it.
So yeah, and I guess I've dabbled a bit in the commercial world, and it's definitely different getting commercial financing than it is residential financing, because you've got to write an entire business plan, business proposal, pro forma. Here's the property, here's what I'm looking at doing, and that financing time. We talked last time about how 5 days is a long time for a financing condition. Talk about 2 months for commercial financing to get approved. Like, it is a long process, right?
Early in my career, we have this big team meeting, and we had one commercial agent at Mortgage Brokers Ottawa, and he was talking to us about commercial just to kind of give us a quick, overview. And he had been working on a deal for over a year before it and then it finally funded.
Yeah.
And then it was however long till he got paid on.
Yeah.
Right. So I mean, he's investing time and energy and money into that, and it's kicked down the road, right? So yeah, it's not the same. It's not the same game. It's not the same game at all.
Yeah.
I've done one commercial deal, and it was for a 5 unit, and that was a situation where, like, $2.5 million, we need a $1.4 million mortgage on this 5 unit property, and it was fully rented. And that was actually the key. The person that the client didn't make enough money to just support that as the way rental math is done, as a residential property. And we made a case for it to the commercial side, and they were like, yeah, okay, that's cool. And he had to show some element of being able to pick up the slack if things went sideways, like if a renter left or something like that. And when we did that, they're like, cool, as a unit, it's essentially self-sustaining, so we're cool with that, and away they go. So it's just different.
Yeah.
Just
Different world altogether. Yeah, the investors that we work with, a lot of them are buying like you say, the up to 5 multis, right? Or they're buying a house and renting that, or like a place with an SDU, a secondary dwelling unit, right? So it's just 2 units, not a big setup. In the second half, I think we're going to talk about the hardships that investors are coming into right now, because the way the rates are going, it's having such a negative impact on values. Like, we looked at a property with some people. It was actually a legal duplex that they had advertised as a 4-plex. There's a whole bunch of problems that went sideways with this deal. Yeah, the other 2 units, the 2 basement units, were not supposed to be there. So built as
nice
a duplex with an unfinished basement. And they finished the basement, and then they advertise it as a 4-plex. Obviously, when you're financing it, all you're going to get is the income, half the income, from the 2 units of the duplex, right? That's all the bank's going to look at. So then again, they're looking at, anyways, the purpose here is I wrote out an entire email to the listing agent who was listed at 975, telling them why it's worth between 800 and 825, because you can only use these incomes, because you're not able to provide the units vacant, because the tenants have been there for so long, because we can only use the income from the 2 units, not the 4, how you have it, listed improperly, yada, yada, yada. Like a big long email about here's what the real value is of that property. And we put in our offer of 800, it was rejected. We put in our offer of 825, it was rejected. They dropped the price down to 875. We put in our offer again of 825, it was rejected. I just noticed that property was sold earlier this week for 820. The difference was, no, we're not taking a price that low. We're not taking it. The difference was the people who bought it did not require vacant possession. We did, because based on the numbers, we needed to put new tenants in who were paying market rent, right, for all of those properties. So, the math is the math, right? And what's hurting investor sellers right now is that the rates have all gone up, which means that everybody's looking for cash flow, right? Which means that it's cash flow negative, which means how much money you're getting from the property. Let's say a property generates 50, just say what's an easy number to divide by 12, $60,000 a year. Let's say a property generates $60,000 a year. That gives you $5,000 a month. If it's your NOI, your net operating income is $60,000 a year. That means how much you make minus what your expenses are. So let's say you make 74, you've got $14,000 of expenses. Your NOI, your net operating income is $60,000 a year. That's $5,000 a month. If the payment on that property is more than $5,000 a month, you're losing money every month on that property. People don't want to buy that. No investor wants to say, oh yeah, great, I'm making $5,000 a month, let me pay $5,500 a month for this property. Nobody wants to do that, right? So the property values are coming down to a point where, okay, if I break even or make a little bit, I'm okay, right? That's
yeah, and it's definitely, and we'll pick this up on the other side, but there's nothing as impactful on the investors right now as the interest rates. And that's because of the sheer cost. But I do have a couple things to add to that, and things that people want to consider for sure. And it does leak into a bigger problem, right? When you start talking about just the amount of rentals that we need, places for people to live, the laws in Ontario, like it's an interesting battle that investors have for sure.
Yeah. Well, and of course, everybody says, the investors are the ones who are making all this money, right? And when you really needle down to it, and you're like, well, how much money are they actually making? Oh, well, they're not actually making a lot of extra money. Where the potential is in long term, right? So real estate is a great
100%.
long-term investment. If you look at, hey, how much are these guys making every month? Nothing. And they're taking on the risk, like you said before, that the tenant moves out and they can't find someone else to move in. Well, geez, they were getting $2,000 a month for that unit. That's $2,000 a month. They still have to pay that money, right? And it's not coming from a tenant. So all of a sudden they're stuck, like you said before, they're stuck holding the bag. And how long can you do that before you're like, oh yeah, no, this is a terrible idea. And you've got to figure out the cash flow issue so that you can get the benefit, the long-term growth benefit, because in Ottawa, long-term prices go up, year over year, on average 5 or 6%. But if you look at it right now, the market's a bit confused, right? Prices are kind of, we did this, we went crazy. We went up by 25%, I don't know, 35 or 50%. And then we came down by 25. And now it's trying to find, okay, well, what's that middle ground? Where are we actually worth? And a lot of that is driven by the rates, as long as some other stuff. So
big time. Yeah, for sure. And we'll talk about it on the other side, but that's where the change has to happen for people in terms of deciding what their path is, right? Your cash flow, I guess the short answer, and maybe it's spoiler, if you're looking for cash flow, I don't see it. There's only two ways that's possible, in my opinion, and from what I see, which is multi-unit, minimum 2, because that obviously, Kyle, that would equate to multi, but minimum, right? Minimum 2 units, or as the numbers showed, because I've worked on a couple this week for some clients and some other realtors, we were crunching numbers. You're looking at 35% down. It's the only two spots. The only two spots that cash flow even becomes close to being like, okay, like we're good or we're making a little. And even then, you have to believe and feel that long term you will get the appreciation. That's because if you don't, you're like, it's not the US where you can buy a place for $100,000. Again, the US, it's not, you can't buy a place for $150,000, right, on a 30-year mortgage, even at 6%, and still rent it for $1,800 to $2,400 and make $700 a month, like TikTok says. That's not here. Like what we have as a safety net here in terms of stability, pricing, not gone up, yes, but not exorbitant pricing like Toronto or Vancouver, right? What we gain there in that stability, we don't have the cash flow that other markets, again, like in the US, have. So it's not, you can't compare. Theories are awesome, but you can't compare those two. They're just not the same.
Exactly. All right. Well, let's take a break there, and then we will get into it in the second half. As always, if you guys are liking what you're hearing, hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, share this with someone who you think might be interested in this kind of information, this type of conversation. You can download us on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. And if you'd like to book your own consultation, either with Kyle or I, you can do so in the Calendly links below. We'll catch you on the flip side.
This episode of the Real Collective podcast is brought to you by Real Collective. Real Collective brings together best-in-class real estate agents and collective experts in the field to deliver the best possible service to our clients. We govern ourselves with honesty, open-mindedness, and compassion. With diverse skill sets, our agents are able to better serve a wide array of clients, including first-time buyers, first-time sellers, transferees, estate sales, investors, and rural, vacation, and luxury properties. Authenticity and transparency are pillars of our process, which allows us to put our clients at the center of everything we do. Our years of experience and knowledge allow us to deliver prestigious service and optimal results. If you are interested in buying or selling your home, contact us today at realcollective.ca.
Welcome back, everybody, to the Real Collective podcast. Your hosts, Sean Tasse and Kyle Miller. Happy to see you. Happy that you see us, because we don't see you. As always, hit that like
button.
Just
assume you're there.
Right. Yeah. All three of you. Hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, download us on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. We're going to talk a little bit more about sort of the trade-off that you've got to make in Canada between either cash flow or equity growth. And that's typically the question that we have with clients. Hey, what do you want out of your investment? Do you want to see cash flow? If that's the case, you're probably not going to find it off the shelf. What that means is that you're not going to see it listed on MLS. What you do is you buy an old junky building, you fix it up, and then you might be able to turn it into some cash flow, or you get into secondary markets. You know, the Arnpriors, the Renfrews, the Prescotts, the Brockvilles, all of that sort of stuff that's further out, that the rents are a little bit higher, but the buildings aren't as nice. You probably will not see as much equity growth, i.e. your $500,000 purchase price is not going to go up to $700,000 in the next 2 years. But if you buy in Ottawa, you're not going to buy for $500,000. You're going to be closer to $1 million or more. But that $1 million or more might see that equity growth in the next couple of years. So it's that trade-off, right? How do you get both? Typically, you don't. Sometimes you can, and then there's some markets that are like, oh, you know, they have this like a Smiths Falls where it's like, oh my goodness, hey, they're putting a big factory and the prices are shooting up. Oh, hey, the factory is coming out, the prices might drop back down again. So there's some risks when you go out to these secondary markets, right? In Ottawa proper, you're always going to be okay in the Glebe, Old Ottawa South, you know, Sandy Hill, renting to students. you might not be in that cash flow situation right off the shelf, but you're always going to be in a positive equity growth. If you're thinking long term, 20 plus years, property values will go up inevitably in the long term.
And the thing too is that equity is the difference, just the difference between what your place is worth and how much you owe. That's the gap. That's what equity is. So the market gives you equity. Forced appreciation by you renovating the property can give you equity. Just having someone else there pay that down gives you creates equity. So I trust people are looking at it from, I invested, my 20%, my 200 grand or 100 grand, whatever it is, right? And having those people pay has brought down my mortgage, not out of my pocket, right? Not out of my pocket, out of there. So they've paid that down, and then the market has helped, and it's gone up too, right? And it sounds simple, but I don't know that everybody thinks about it like that. And again, too, I think there's another little play in there in terms of how it works or how it can work. And it's understanding, again, I say it all the time, but I'm like, when you understand the numbers, right? There's always going to be a risk playing in real estate. I don't think we can deny that.
Yeah.
But when you understand the numbers, and if things hold true, like, the other thing is, you don't need to have these things paid off for them to benefit you, right? Like, I think we balance, especially in Canada, we're so driven to like, got to pay off my mortgage, got to pay off my mortgage, got to pay off my mortgage. And there's nothing wrong with that. So don't people hate on me for this, right? But things are happening where that is a real conversation has to be had around. That's not always going to happen anymore. Yeah. So using another piece of real estate as a means to an end works, right? Like, I have the math that shows, like, one way to do it. If you've got appreciation of an average, okay, of 5%, which is slightly aggressive, but not as aggressive as it's been, not as low as it's been. So it's somewhere in the middle. If you buy a property, and I'm doing this with $600,000 style properties, so nothing a million, but also I'm not asking you to buy a $200,000 property here that doesn't exist. Exactly. 600,000 kind of thing, right? In about 11 years, with an average interest rate of 5% across that time, which is roughly where we're going to be when things settle out, right? Paying all expenses, you can buy a property, rent it out for 11 years, and you've refinanced your property, by the way. So you've increased your own personal mortgage to do this. But if that holds true, you can sell that property and pay off your property and all the expenses, including capital gains for you people that get all wired about that, including it, right? You can still pay that off and pay off your mortgage. So it doesn't necessarily have to be this cash cow forever, right? Or again, the TikTok or YouTube or US thing of just like, if you just buy 20 properties, your life will be easy, right? Like, no, you don't need to do that, yeah. Right? Because what the market's given us here now, right? If you can wrap your head around it, and it's not for everybody. Investing in real estate is not for everybody, and that's okay too. Is you have that equity. You may not think you do, but you have that equity. You have enough, most likely, if you've had your house for 5, 7, 10 years, that you could use it to buy another property and have that property pay you off in 10 to 15 years. And the numbers say that.
And we did a podcast, I don't know, I must have been in the last season, in season 8, maybe it was even season 7, where we had some people on and they talked about the Smith maneuver and cash damming, and that really gets into nerding out on the numbers, where you pay. Go watch the podcast. I'm not going to try and explain it because it is confusing, but it expedites that entire process. That math is amazing, that, hey, you know what? Take 2, use that to pay for the principal one. The nice thing is, if all you're seeing is the growth on 11 years on the property, and you apply that all to your personal residence, well, you know what? When you sell your personal residence, you don't have to do the capital gains thing, right? And absolutely, there's more opportunity maybe to do some creative stuff with real estate in the States. But I think there's a lot more stability in Canada, and especially in Ottawa, right? And I mean, there's a reason why all of these big investment players are buying up properties in Canada and saying, hey, look, I'll buy anything in Ottawa with a cap rate over, under even like above 3.5, that's within the greenbelt, sort of from Bayshore to Saint Laurent, north of, Baseline Road. I'll take all of that, even at a low cap rate, because Ottawa is still undervalued compared to some of the other big G7, G8 countries, right? Most people who live in these capital cities, they're renters. They don't own their house. We've been really, really lucky for a long time to live in this city and to own our properties, as opposed to a lot of the other places that are big players. Their properties are too expensive, right? Versus how much the average person makes. And we're getting closer and closer. We're getting further and further away from home ownership, and closer and closer to the play to the idea where people are coming in and they're having to rent because they can't own, right?
And I think it's another way to look at it too. Sorry to cut you off, but it's situation too of looking ahead, right? Like, like as if all that holds true and everything starts and things keep going up, right? Because on one hand, you want them to. If you own a house, you want those to go up. If you're a renter and want to get in or having a tough time getting in, and there's a lot of that, you want this whole shit to fall apart and crash, right? And then, haha, now you win. And it's tough because I see it, but I'm like, I don't know. Yeah, I don't know my opinion on it, to be honest, but I know I own a house, so that's where I'm at. But I'm looking at it from my son. Like, my son's 21 years old,
Yeah.
right? And he needs to stack cash. But when you think of how fast prices rise, but how slow incomes rise,
Yeah.
in the next 10 years, he still will be behind the 8 ball. And
Yeah.
if he's looking at us to help him, and we might want to, and we want to be able to, it's a smaller investment today to buy a property, let it sit, not reap the cash benefits, right? Take it if it breaks even. Hell, even if it loses $200 a month, I'd rather pay $200 a month, right? And in my opinion, this is just my opinion, treat it like a savings account to be able to sell it down the road, take a piece, but give him a chunk that he can get started, rather than him look at me and say, it really helped me if you found 250 grand and remortgaged your entire house again so I could get in. Because I'll tell you now, through the pandemic, and even now, that is rinse and repeat in the GTA. I've spoken to I was at a thing, all these GTA brokers. I'm like, how are you guys pulling these volumes? And what are you doing? He's like, someone comes to us, they qualify for 700,000. Good for them. But every house is 1.2. So what do? You have parents? Yep. They own their house? Yep. We're going to refinance their house for 200,000 or 300,000. They're going to gift it to you. You're going to put the money down. Rinse, repeat. Two deals, $1 million. Boom. They do it all day long.
Yeah.
And then people sit there and say, but what about the parents? That's exactly it. No one's thought about them and what they have to go through and what's left, right? Yeah. So now, if that's looking like it might be us, guys, history repeats itself. Let's look at this. And for $30,000, $40,000, $50,000 today, that we have 20 years or 30 years to pay back in general, if you follow what I'm saying, that could be taken care of by, I don't want to say the market, like not like the budget balances itself, but right, that there's an opportunity there, right? And it's easier to deal. I think could be easier to deal with.
It's funny. I was talking with two neighbors last week, and I was telling both of them, hey, if there's an opportunity that you can pull some equity out of your house and turn around and double it up, there's a lot of scarcity isn't the right word, but a lot of fear around, well, what about bad tenants? What about this? What about this? What about this? It's like, yeah, you know what? Those are all risks. Absolutely. Those are all risks. But the reward is pretty significant because What if you have to pull out $250,000 of equity, $300,000 of equity from your property in 10 or 15 years when your kid is ready to start their life? Do you want to do that? Or hey, I've got $100,000 to give them. Okay, great. Well, that barely gets them onto the ladder right now, right? Versus how can you do it? My next door neighbor, she was talking to me, said, hey, you know what about buying a property, or having my son who's in medical school buy a property, put it in his name, I'll help him out, and then he's on the ladder and he's young and he's getting started, right? So there's a lot of different ways to do it. And I think, from an investment point of view, the sooner you do it, the better off you're going to be, really, is what it comes down to. So
yeah, completely agree on that front. And you have to have the stomach to do it. If you don't, you don't, and that's okay. And that's the one thing is what I hate is people who are like the word should drives me to drink. Like, it drives me nuts. You know what you should do? I'm like, you know what you should do?
Shut up.
Not tell me that, or whatever that is.
Yeah.
Right? Because that's one thing you'll never hear me say is, you know what people should do?
Yeah.
Rarely, right?
Yeah.
When I ever say that. And that's the thing. If it's not for you, it's not for you.
Yeah.
But don't get mad at it. And, one thought is people say, well, I don't, or I couldn't see myself, or I won't have the means to give $100,000 to my kid. Okay, accept that, and that's fine. Right? Like that's okay too. If you can't, you can't. But maybe with some time in the market, you could, if you decide to look at it the right way today, right?
Yeah, because maybe
I don't know how much. Go ahead.
I was going to say, maybe the market can give that money to your kid instead of you giving it to them, right?
Yeah, and maybe we're going to go through a cycle where it does go down, and you don't get that, and you don't get that much.
Here's my big thing is people saying, oh, well, you know what, we don't know what the market's going to do. I don't want to buy right now because the rates are too high. When the rates are high, the prices are low. So right now, if the rates are too high, the prices are low. So it's a good opportunity. There's a place that we were looking at. It's listed right now for $400,000. The house right across the street last year sold for $528,000. Is there a chance that this house that you can buy for $400,000 today, at some point in the next 5 or 10 years, might be worth $528,000 again? Right. So yeah, okay, the rates might be a little bit higher, it might be a little bit more expensive, whatever. But if we've already been there, there's no reason that we can't go back there. And how else can you take 400,000 to 500,000 and really, to buy a $400,000 house, how much do you have to put down?
Well, 80. If it's an investment, you're putting down 80.
Sure. What if it's not an investment, but you live there, right? Your house hacking.
Oh, like 20 grand.
Right. So you put down 20 grand, and in, let's say, 10 years, sure, you've made your payments and all that kind of stuff, and you got other people living with you, whatever. You've paid money, but you were going to pay money in rent anyways, right? And you take that $20,000 of money that you've actually spent, and your closing costs were 10 grand. Let's say $30,000 of real true money, but your house has gone from a $400,000 value to a $500,000 value. How else can you take $20,000 and make $100,000 in 4 or 5 years? You can't.
And net 70.
Right.
Yeah. Where are you going to invest in net 70 grand?
Right.
In a decade.
Right. And that's the value of real estate investing. I think this is like what we should have said at the beginning. The value of real estate investing is you get the chance to 5x what you're putting in, right? Because you're borrowing only, 20% of the value, or you're only spending 20% of the value of the house, but you're making money off the bank when you're investing in real estate, because they're lending you the money. But as that property goes up in value, you're getting that. The bank doesn't see any of that. You just have to pay back what you borrow. That's the big ticket about real estate, is you get a chance to 5x your money. You put that same money in the open market, the stock market. Hey, it goes, hey, look at that, it went up 10%. That's great. But you only get the 10%. Right? That's the big thing. Anyways, I'm pumped about it. Sorry.
Well, yeah, but what if, I don't know how much time we have left because I don't have the timer, but what about those things, like those fears? Because that's a thing. And I think that's part of a bigger conversation, which is probably not for this podcast, about the state of where we are, right? I mean, people know the rules more and more. I mean, there's people on TikTok that make I don't say living, but like it's their mission to be like, I don't want to say to create professional tenants, but they know that they spit the rules about what tenants actually can and can't do. And like, that's tough. I mean, I think the vast majority of people aren't dicks. Right. And I think the vast majority of landlords aren't slumlords, but there's definitely a solid mix of those two that get all the headlines. So like it is a true fear that someone's just like, I don't want to pay you. And guess what? I don't have to, sucker. And you're like, ugh.
Yeah.
So like, how do you guys handle that as realtors?
That there's a great solution to it, and I think it's an awesome chance to have on the next podcast. I would say the best way to answer that question is I don't want to say it in an open forum. So click on that link below, and we can have the offline conversation of how we can protect our clients when they're going through some tricky situations with tenants. Because some of the stuff that you could say might not be appropriate to share in a advertised forum. So with
I don't know what you're talking about. I have no idea.
That's right. With that in mind, hey, you know what? As long as you can play in the gray, as long as you're staying within the rules, it's okay. But there's some things that you kind of just don't want to talk about. Anyways, if you're liking what you're hearing, hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, share this with someone who you think might be interested in finding out how to solve these problems. Click on that Calendly link below and I'll tell you all about it one-on-one. You can do the same for Kyle or for myself if you're listening to us on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. Thank you so much. And until next time, keep it real.
Collective.